Hello everybody, last time we talked about arrays and objects, and this time we're going to talk about a very important topic called control structures, and they allow you to do a lot in computer programming, and it's a very core part of programming for a reason. But let's talk about it. Control structures are basically allow you to run some code based on condition, and for example, if you have some code and you don't want to run that because a condition is not true, then we could actually pass that code and we don't run it. Or we could have some code that we want to repeat multiple times because of a simple condition or a complex condition. We're going to look into that. So let's go in code and see what control structures are all about. So if you come from a programming language that other than JavaScript before you got here, you probably know what control structures are, and you probably heard of the if statement and the for loops and the while loop and the do while loop and the switch statement. So it's not going to be very new to you, which is pretty good. And if you're new to programming, let's go and actually explain what this is all about. So first of all, let me create a boolean, and you know that because we talked about that last time. So a boolean, I'm going to call it my boolean. I'm going to set it first to true, and then I'm actually going to create an if statement. You say you type if, and then you have those parentheses and then curly brackets. And inside of those parentheses, you have a condition, and that condition basically has to resolve to a boolean. So we have a boolean here, and I'm going to actually use it. So in between those parentheses, it has to resolve to a boolean. So if you have a boolean right away, you could use it, but later on, we're going to learn that some other operators could resolve into a boolean, which means they could resolve to true or false, and we're going to look into that later on. But right now we're explaining the if condition itself and how it works, and then we're going to get into comparison operators and how they can actually turn to booleans to be able, and you would be able to use them in your condition statements. So this is an if condition, and it says here, if my boolean, then run that, which means if my boolean is equal to true, then we run what's inside of those curly brackets, and if it's false, then we don't. So let me explain that by example here. Console log and say running from the if statement, semicolon, and let's see in the console what actually we do get. So it says here running from the if statement, which displays that this block of code is running. But if I turn this to false now, which means if my boolean, which is false, then what is going to happen? Nothing. Because now this is false, that means you're telling JavaScript, no, we don't want to run this code block, which will escape this code block right away. We have something called the else statement, which means if the condition is false, we're not going to run that, right? But we want to run some other code, so please run this code for me. And then you say here, for example, console log, and you say running from the else statement here to try that out. And you see the else statement being concatenated to the curly brackets of the first if, and then you could have your curly brackets here, and between those curly brackets you type here your code, which is going to be ran if the condition is false, which is the correct answer that we have here, that we have this is false, so this is the one that's being run. And if we look into the console, on the console tab here, running from the else statement. Pretty cool, right? So we also have an else if statement. What does that do? Let me show you what does it do. So in between, we could have an else if statement. Just as we created the else statement, we could create the else if statement. It's like an if statement, but it's concatenated to the if statement, and it says that if the first if is incorrect, then check the second one. And let's say we have two conditions instead of one. One is true, one is false, or vice versa. So for example, let's say the second one is true, the first one is false, my boolean 2, and I'm going to take this here and put this here. Now what is going to happen is, let me just get this here from the else if statement, and if I reload that, you see running from the else if statement. So what is going on here? Let me explain. So we have my boolean, which is false, and we have my boolean 2, which is true. So what happens is it actually goes into this if condition. It says if my boolean, which is false, then we're not going to run the first block of code, right? And then it goes into the second one and says if my boolean 2, if this is true, then we're going to run this console log. And then basically this is what happened here, running from the else if statement. But then since this is true, we do not go into the else statement, and we can go out to the if condition right away. So let's say that I have this is as true, and both of them are true, okay? So you might think, okay, both of them are true, that means that we're gonna run this one and then we're gonna run the second one. which is exactly false. This is not what's gonna happen. It's gonna go first into my boolean. It's gonna say, oh, this is true. It's gonna run the first one, but since this one is an else if statement, which means it only runs if the first one is wrong. If the first one is false, then we can actually test for the second one, but here the first one is true, so we only execute the first one and we exit the code. So this is actually the if statement, and it's pretty powerful. You could run code conditionally, and it's going to be very useful as we go through our journey towards mastering JavaScript. So there is some rules that you have to see about booleans. So what if I, instead of my boolean, let me actually remove the conditions here, the else if and the else condition, and let me talk here about only my boolean. What if I say this is true right away? It's gonna execute right away because I'm stating that it's true, then it's gonna run, right? What if it's false? Then it's not gonna run because it's false. But what if I use 1? Oh, so basically it actually running from the if statement. So whoa, you just said that we need booleans to run this, and it only works on true and false. So what is going on? Why 1 actually is running the if statement? Because 1 is treated as true, but it's not just treated as true, it actually has the same value as true. Now let me explain that to you by using here a console log, and there is an operator which we can test if something is equal to something, which is the double operator, equal operator, and see if 1 is equal to true, and that will give us true. Okay, so 1 is basically true. Not exactly, it has the same value, but it's not the same type. 1 is a number and true is a boolean, but they have the same value, which is 1. But if we check the type, and that we get false right away, because if we use the triple equal sign, we're not just checking if the value is equal, but we're also checking if they have the same type. But no, 1 is a number, true is a boolean, they have the same value, but they don't have the same type. That's why we get false. So 1 is exactly true, but it's not the same type. But if you use it inside of the if statement, then we are gonna get true. What if I choose 0 and see if 0 is equal to false in value, and we still get true? And now you get the idea that 0 and 1, if you understand the binary system, 0 is false and 1 is true. So that's exactly what we see. 0 has the same value as false, but it's not of the same type. And then if we use 0 here, that means that basically we're not going to get the console log, because 0 is treated as and has the same value as false. That's why we don't get the console log running from the if statement. But what if I use, for example, 2? Okay, so running from the if statement. So 2 now is treated as equal, which is weird, right? We just said that 1 is treated as equal, then how is 2 treated as equal? So let me check here if 2 has the same value as true. So let me try that. And run that and see, oh, it's false. So it does not even equal to true in terms of the value. So how is it running? So JavaScript is a little bit weird, but it treats anything that other than 0 as true if we use it in an if statement. The only thing that is treated as false is 0, and treats anything else as true. So for example, even if I use here -1, that will still run our console log. So one important tip in JavaScript and a rule is that null and undefined are both treated as false. So let's check out this in code. So we have here our if statement with 1 as, you know, the value here between parentheses, and you know that this will actually run in console because 1 is treated as true. But let's say instead of 1 we use the null keyword, and I'm going to explain both null and undefined after we run this. So you see, nothing has been run, and if we use undefined as well, we get nothing, which means they're both treated as false. So what is null and what is undefined? So undefined, as I mentioned before, is that you create a variable and then it has no value and you never set its value. So that's why it's called undefined. You never defined it. But what is null? Is it similar to undefined? Kind of similar, but kind of different at the same time. So, and null means that you've created a variable and you want to set its value, but you still don't have a value for it. So you set it to null means that the value has not arrived yet, or has not been calculated yet, or so on. So that's the difference. Undefined means that you never actually assigned it, you just created a variable, declared it, and you never used it. And null is a a term which means that you want to set a variable to a value, but you still actually don't have that value. That's why in some web applications, when we have a value as null, we display a spinning loading bar or a spinning loading animation, so to tell that, oh, the value is not there yet, and whenever the value comes from the server and we receive it, then we change the null to the value, and then we disable the spinning loading animation and we show the data. So that's the difference between undefined and null. So let's do a little bit of a check here and console log if undefined is equal to false and see if that's actually correct. And as you see, we get false, which means that undefined is only treated as false when it's used between the parentheses, but its value is not equal to false, and of course the type is not the same. And if we use, for example, null here instead of undefined and see if it's equal to false, let me check this, it actually comes as false, which means null as well is not equal to false. It's basically treated as null, treated as false whenever we use it between parentheses. So that's the idea, but let's check if null itself is equal to undefined, which is an important comparison here, and you'll be shocked from the outcome, which is true. So null is basically having the same value as undefined, but do they have the same type? Let's check out. Here we go. No, they don't. It's, as I mentioned, null and undefined, they are kind of similar. They mean that we don't have a value, but they still mean different things semantically. Null means that we have a value, but it's not there yet, but undefined means that we never set the value before, so that's the difference. And if we check the type of both of these, you'll find it's shocking to find that type of null, guess what? Type of null will be an object. So null is a special type of object that's just telling you that you don't have a value right now. You set the variable, but you don't have a value for it right now. Instead of undefined, which means, and it has a type of undefined, which means that you have a variable and you never declared it. You declared it, but you never given it a value. So that's the difference between the two. It's very important, and I know that JavaScript has a little bit of a complex rules, or sometimes that does not make sense to people, but you're gonna get the hang of this as we go, and you're gonna master it. Don't worry about it. See you next time.